Welcome back to the Texas Longhorns Orange Bloods football YouTube channel. Easy for me to say. I'm Ari Tepkin. He is Geoff Ketchum. Welcome to another edition of Transfer Portal Talk. And on today's episode, we're going to be picking through what looks like the remnants of the OU roster that have hit the portal, talking about Lincoln Riley's move to USC, what that means for Texas football in the portal, and might not all be good. But first, before we do that, I want to remind you to subscribe to the channel. That way you're always in the know for all the latest Texas football and Texas Longhorns happenings. And of course, make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you like what you're watching. But Ketch, I thought you had an interesting tweet sort of talking about the competition that Texas now has in the portal with OU, who, when they do end up hiring their new head coach, like that's a big part of how they're going to replenish their roster. And so, like, on the one hand, it's like, oh, Marvin Mimms, maybe he's going to be a guy that flips to Texas, even though he's not officially the portal yet. Or, Theo Wease or Jadon Haselwood or any of these former five stars that are now going to be leading Oklahoma. Like, that's the good news of it. But the other part to this, as you brought up, is now you're also competing in the transfer market for these kids outside of OU for them in the portal.
I think it's just really interesting, Ari, that I think most teams across the country this year are going to use their portal space and add players. The fact that every team across the country has been given a little bit of a buffer in the event that you get hit in the portal, you can use up to 7 scholarships. So you can go up to 32 this year from a scholarship number. And I think that number will eventually go up because of situations like Oklahoma, right? I mean, if they have any more of a purge, they're going to be in a position where they're going to have a hard time getting up to 85 scholarships without an increase in the numbers. But what I think is really interesting is that while everybody's going to be in the portal looking to improve their teams, Texas and Oklahoma will be in a position where it's critical that they have success in the portal to rebuild their teams. Without that success, neither program may be able to get to the heights that it wants to a year from now. And that's a different deal than the idea, I think, initially you pitched this a year ago, and Texas and Oklahoma would both think about the portal as a means to cherry pick. I think fast forward to December of this year, especially on the offensive side of the ball for Oklahoma, you're looking at two programs that are in the middle of rebuilds to a certain extent. And without real success through the portal, they're going to find themselves limited on the field next year in 2022 in ways that they just would have never have guessed when this conversation first popped up.
Well, and how about, like, when coaches leave jobs and go to new places, there are players that leave, obviously, because certain players go to certain schools for certain coaches. So, like, we're seeing that happen with OU right now. We will see that happen with Notre Dame. We will see that happen with LSU. USC is now going to become a greater destination. I mean, look at how effective Lincoln's been at recruiting, to Oklahoma because of his offense. Now he's at USC. He's going to recruit well there, but he'll play the transfer portal too. And I'm very curious to see how Lincoln does maneuver the portal his first year there. But I mean, it's Texas, it's Oklahoma, it's LSU, it's Notre Dame, it's USC. I mean, there are some heavy hitters that are going to be losing players, but then also gaining players back that are now your competition, your de facto competition in the portal too.
It's free agency. It really is. And I don't think that enough people have had a big enough vision for what this will look like. But the Oklahoma situation, I think, is a perfect illustration of what could happen. And I just don't know that enough people have stopped and thought about all of the endless possibilities of how the portal may unfold. Lincoln Riley making a lateral move from OU to USC, that rarely happens. And for Oklahoma, like, the impact of that is significant. They've lost their entire wide receiver room, has basically walked out of town. Right. Austin Stogner is gone. And you think about, we forget at the same time they're losing an entire batch of seniors. So it's not just when you think about the Oklahoma football team, and look, they still have a bowl game to go to. It's not who they were this season. It's potentially, what do they look like with 40% of their roster gutted from graduation and portal departures? And the answer is completely new, and it's a new coach. It's a completely different staff.
Is there anybody is there anybody that scares you that OU hires this guy? That's a huge boost for them in recruiting in the portal. Because Brent Venables is the name that I keep hearing, and it obviously makes a ton of sense. Does that frighten you at all in terms of this?
No. I mean, Brent Venables, I think the addition of Brent Venables probably means you'd see most of the exodus for Oklahoma has been on the offensive side of the ball. So it seems clear that defensive players are taking a bit of a wait and see approach.
Right.
I think you're seeing those offensive players, they went to Oklahoma because of Lincoln Riley, and probably not quite so much on the other side of the ball. Venables shores that thing up. The thing is, Oklahoma's going from one of the 3 to 5 best coaches in America. I mean, Texas fans won't want to hear this, but they know,
right?
Lincoln Riley is a guaranteed quarterback developing genius based on what he's done at Oklahoma, from Baker Mayfield to Kyler Murray to Jalen Hurts. He turned all of those guys into Heisman finalists, and 2 of them into Heisman winners.
And number 1 overall picks.
His worst pupil at this point is the starting quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. So, Caleb Williams kind of replaced Spencer Rattler as that next guy. Everybody realizes that Caleb Williams, by the time he's done, had he stayed under Lincoln Riley at Oklahoma, that guy's going to be a Heisman finalist at a minimum. He was almost a Heisman finalist as a 6-week player. Now, their offense has declined a little bit in the last couple of years, mainly because what Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield did was historically all-time great quarterback play. So even when you have Heisman finalist level quarterbacks, when they're not all-time great quarterbacks, it makes a slight change, but it's hard to see where they're anywhere remotely what they were. This was a program that was identified by their quarterbacks, and I think by Riley's recruiting over the course of the last few years, looking at what they'd really been doing on the offensive side of the ball in recruiting. It's a completely new program that has to change its vision. And I don't know what the right answer is for Oklahoma. They're getting ready to go into the SEC. When Bob Stoops left, they didn't have this identity that existed under Lincoln Riley. He made that. So Riley made the program really into the image of him. And now that's gone. You can't really replace that with a head coaching hire. You're going to at least have a small dip. Who scares Texas? I think Lane Kiffin would be a good hire.
Agreed. I can't believe he hasn't been linked more to this. Agreed.
I thought completely. Chip Kelly is a guy that hasn't had the success at UCLA, but he's a guy that's coached in the NFL. He's generally thought of as an offensive genius. And you could, it's a like for like switch to a certain extent. I don't like the idea of them hiring somebody really from the defensive side of the ball, because that's just not, that means you're starting over as a program. And this is a program that up until this year had won 6 straight Big 12 championships and was knocking on the door of, it's easy to forget how people were talking about Oklahoma 4 months ago.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's wild.
But they were thought to be a playoff team, that this might be the year they finally get over the hump. And they were never that kind of team all season long, primarily because they had the issues at quarterback with Spencer Rattler, and it just never quite came together for them. So for them to have been a top 5 program in America coming into this season, based on their dominance of the Big 12 and competing for playoff spots, to have to go through a completely different rebuild or into a rebuild with an identity that doesn't exist today. And look, Riley was recruiting like gangbusters. Yeah. So to bring somebody in who's a good recruiter, that just means that part is a wash. But what is Oklahoma as a team going to look like next season? Its head coach will determine many of that. And if it's a Brent Venables and he goes out and hires an offensive coordinator that's really good, that has minimal impact, I think, in the grand scheme of things, because you are constantly having to replace coordinators. Look at Texas. They're constantly having to hire offense. That's why they hired Sark. They hired Sarkisian because they were like, God, we keep on having to hire a new offensive coordinator every year, either because they're failing or because it's whatever reasons. Oklahoma to go defense with a head coach, it's just a total identity change. It's really kind of hard for me to comment on it right now, other than anything other than what they've been doing sounds really good, I think, to Texas, because Oklahoma's won 6 straight Big 12 championships going into Saturday, and they didn't do it with a defensive coach. They did it with one of the all-time great offensive head coaches, at least of this generation. If you feel like that's too much hyperbole, you're watching this video and you're like, I'm about to leave, catch a message. Who does he think he is? What about the quarterbacks at Miami back in the 80s and all that? Fine. I won't argue that point. But what he's done in the last 10 years has never been done before anywhere. And he's taking transfers, 3 of them, and just turn them into number 1 overall picks or starting quarterbacks in the NFL. They took Alabama's trash in Jalen Hurts and turned him into a guy that's good enough to compete for a starting quarterback position in the NFL as a rookie.
And was a runner-up to the Heisman Trophy.
And that was like a throwaway for Oklahoma. Right. It's like, oh, well, if he doesn't win the Heisman and he's not the first pick in the draft, then that just falls down the list of things that we can promote in our program. So this is a monumental moment for Texas. And I can't stress enough, the thing that Oklahoma is going to have to do really through the portal is build their offense almost entirely from the portal, because all of their recruits on the offensive side of the ball, both in the 2022 and 2023 classes, have basically decommitted.
Yep.
So they don't have a quarterback. They're losing their wide receiver room. They're about to be in a position where Eric Gray, the transfer running back from Tennessee a year ago, and thought to be, before the season, maybe the big impact player from the portal. It's funny. I went back through the athletic.com's top 50 list, and Eric Gray was a Tony Mandarich level bust compared to
right.
You look at the rest of the top.
He was like
10,
number 1 or number 2 on those lists for sure.
And 7 of the top 10 guys were like all conference players, definite starters. They will need that guy next year to kind of turn into the guy that they thought he would be, because Kennedy Brooks won't be there. So and the Caleb Williams thing is the elephant in the room, because if he were to transfer, you're probably talking about Oklahoma needing help at every single position on offense in the portal. And if they hire a defensive minded coach, he may just have to figure it out with what he has staying on the roster. They need volume. They need at least a few receivers. They may need 2 quarterbacks, because they don't have anybody in this recruiting class, and they don't have anybody in the next recruiting class. And it may be just like with Texas, it may be the 2 guys they have for different reasons, but Spencer Rattler's already gone. And I don't know what to think of Caleb Williams, but if they don't hire an offensive minded head coach, why would you stay if you're Caleb Williams? And you can pick any situation in the world to go to. Playing for some offensive coordinator who is only good enough at this point to be an offensive coordinator at his job is the kind of thing that you might not marry yourself to if you have other options. And Caleb Williams will have options all over America. About the only
it's pretty remarkable. Texas is finishing up a 5-7 season. It was a disaster by every metric, in every way you want to look at it. And yet here we are, and it's like, wow, Oklahoma might actually be in worse shape. That's incredible.
Well, and I don't know how to. These are 2 teams right now that you can't even do records with. If someone were to say, what do you think Texas or Oklahoma will do record-wise in 2020? Point. How the hell could you possibly know? I mean,
that's modern college football for you.
I don't know who's on the roster and who's not on the roster. for either program yet, which is why we're having this portal conversation about these two. Think about this: when Texas and Oklahoma played each other in October, what was thought to be on the line in that game from conference supremacy standpoint. Both of those schools, regardless of the outcome, we're in December and they're kind of wiped out and needing to rebuild. And again, without it, and we're going to do future shows where we're talking specifically about quarterbacks who've entered the portal, things like that. Without hitting home runs, these two teams will finish as also rans next year on the field in the Big 12 in what might be their last year in the Big 12. Oh, by the way, they also have to start preparing for what life in the SEC is going to look like. It's a two-pronged approach to how they have to view acquiring incoming talent, and they both have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, well said. That's Geoff Ketchum. I'm Ari Temkin. Make sure to go to orangebloods.com for all the latest on Texas football and Texas athletics. And of course, subscribe to the channel if you have not yet already to be up to date on everything going on Texas football and Texas athletics. But for now,
hold on. If they're going to subscribe to the channel, they might as well go ahead and take advantage of the Black Friday offer that orangebloods.com is throwing out for $20, basically. For $20, you can have the entire next 12 months paid for. You can follow signing day, the portal craziness, the rebuild in the spring, the entire 2022 season. Now's the time. Take advantage of it. It's the single greatest offer I've ever seen Rivals.com offer. And we've seen you guys in the comments section who were new to the channel and like, what's this Orange Bloods thing that you're talking about? Why do you keep referencing? That's it. Orangebloods.com. And there's a free trial right now for you to check it out. That is better than anything I've ever seen. So now, Ari, you can finish it up.
No, couldn't have said it any better. We're out. Peace.
Later.